Whether it's plentiful water, a clean atmosphere, or protected forests, around the globe we're facing a huge decline in the world's natural capital. Although we're increasingly aware of the part we play in this, many organizations don't realize the financial risk it poses to their operations and supply chains. So, what can be done? To prevent dangerous climate change, protect our natural resources, and minimize risk, accountability is paramount. In order to manage, we must measure. At CDP, we harness market forces to drive change by providing the only global system for the disclosure of environmental information. It helps to motivate thousands of companies and cities to measure, disclose, and manage environmental risks and opportunities. For companies and cities, CDP drives awareness of where to make strategic changes in order to increase efficiency, save money, and capitalize on commercial opportunities. It also builds competitive advantage and resilience. For investors and procurement teams, the information enables analysis of long-term risks and opportunities so that better investment decisions can be made. But it doesn't stop there. Policymakers and academics all benefit from these crucial insights. And it's working. Disclosing to CDP gave Walmart the insight to focus on reducing its refrigerant footprint after learning that it made up a larger percentage of the company's greenhouse gas emissions than its truck fleet. It helped Boeing to advance its strategies and set performance targets for carbon management. It even enabled Allergan to develop a 10-year vision to reduce water consumption by 50% by 2020. And they're not alone. Already 81% of the Global 500 report to us, informing investors with assets of $78 trillion. CDP is catalyzing change. Over the last 3 years, the number of Global 500 companies that have integrated climate change into their business strategy has jumped by over 60%. CDP data points are now downloaded on Bloomberg terminals an average of 1 million times every 6 weeks. And we've only just started.
Well, welcome everybody. Good morning, everybody in London. Good afternoon if you're east of Moscow. Welcome to this year's Global Climate Change Forum. This is the 3rd year that this forum has been broadcast worldwide. It's also the 11th year that CDP has published the Global 500 Climate Change Report, which we will come on to very shortly. And you will, later on in this broadcast, hear about the encouraging examples of what companies are doing to facing up to these challenges. But the discussion that we really want to focus on here is the central challenge facing the whole the world in general, which is, can we achieve economic growth without increasing emissions? Because the stark truth is, in spite of the good work that a lot of companies are doing, global emissions of CO2 are increasing at over 1.2% a year. So somehow this coupling of economic growth from emissions needs to be tackled if global emissions are due to come down. In terms of structure of this next hour and a half, we will first look at the findings of the report with the panel we have in the studio here. We will then expand the discussion to a broader debate on this subject involving distinguished guests from Asia and Europe. So without further ado, if I could introduce the panel here in London. We have Paul Dickinson, Executive Chairman of the CDP, Paul Simpson, CEO of the CDP, and Malcolm Preston, Global Leader of PwC's Sustainability and Climate Change Practice. Paul, would you like to take the floor?
Thanks very much, Guy. And I want to just give a little bit of context at the start of our discussion about something that's really animating the global debate on climate change. And that's, we've always known about globalization as an economic context, but increasingly it's about governance, actually. And we're seeing global citizens really beginning to use their influence financially, their dollars, renminbi, yen, euros, through their fiduciaries as investors and through global brands as consumers. And they're really acting to make sure they kind of protect themselves on this critical issue of national security in the 21st century. But there are problems with some companies that are kind of undermining the credibility of government science. And I must say that this behavior certainly to me seems somewhat outrageous, to put personal financial interest ahead of what you could call public safety. We do have to pay attention to what scientists are telling us. Carbon dioxide levels have reached 400 parts per million, and we're starting to see more extreme weather events. An example of a terrible extreme weather event, Hurricane Sandy, where millions of Americans were without electric power for days. So CDP have instigated a program to look at lobbying and support for government policy, but also opposition by companies and trade associations. We think regulation is inevitable and governments need to collaborate to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to solve this problem. But there will be opportunities. We can dematerialize the world economy. I can't think of a better example of that than this Cisco telepresence system we're using today, communicating globally without travel. This can create jobs and improve quality of life. So let me conclude by thanking very much the companies that have responded to CDP this year. Let me also thank Bloomberg, our global media partner, and PwC, our global advisor, and hand over, in terms of responses, to my colleague Paul Simpson, CEO of CDP.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Guy. As you say, the scientific, economic and societal case for action on climate change and sustainability has been increasing, and it's for that reason that at CDP we've broadened our work, adding forests to the climate change and water programme, so we're now covering 79% of natural capital by value. And it's for this reason that earlier in the year we rebranded from the Carbon Disclosure Project, as we've been known, to CDP, and we're strengthening our work to drive action. As you said, Guy, the case for that is very strong. We are working with investors through shareholder engagement, increasing transparency on corporate lobbying and highlighting the great investments and projects many companies are making to reduce emissions that are delivering strong financial returns. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce the CDP Global Climate Change Report this year and to give you just a few of the findings. Really, what is the report telling us? And what we see is that there are some very positive signs of progress. More companies are taking actions. However, this action remains, as you referred to, Guy, very much inadequate against the scientific challenge. If we look at the 50 largest emitting companies who've been reporting for the last 5 years, largely the energy, materials and utilities sectors, we can see that their average emissions since 2009 have increased by 1.65% to 2.54 billion tonnes of greenhouse gas emissions equivalent. So they're rising. If we look at the 5 largest emitting companies across the 10 sectors analysed in the report, they've gone up by 2.3%. So they're also rising. So we see a stark trend that the biggest companies with the largest emissions, on average, not all of them, are increasing. And this is really a key challenge for the corporate sector and for policymakers. Just a little bit in the specific sectors, the energy sector, the oil and gas sector, comes out in this report as the one that needs to do most to improve its performance. 24% of energy companies have no target to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and that's the highest of any sector. They also clearly need to do something to address the risk that their reserves may become stranded assets as governments increase regulation. The utilities sector, the largest emitter in the Global 500, actually has relatively mature strategies on climate change. All utilities companies have a target to reduce emissions, and the majority are working with their customers to help them become more energy efficient. Now, the report also highlights great opportunities for companies to reduce emissions and risk across their value chains, through their supply chains, the use of their products. And the finance sector stands out as one of the the key sectors here, obviously they have relatively low emissions from their own operations, but we see a significant lack of understanding about the risks and the carbon impact through their investments. Only 6% of finance sector companies have started to measure the emissions through their investments, and we think this is a critical area. Just looking at what is really driving change currently, monetary incentives, where companies provide incentives in the financial sense to their board, executive team or all staff, we see that those companies are able to reduce emissions 18% more than companies without those financial incentives. One of the critical findings is that we see that companies who demonstrate the best disclosure and the best performance, as shown in our disclosure and performance leadership indexes, produce financial outperformance over the last few years. So the disclosure companies are outperforming the Global 500 benchmark by approximately 2/3 in terms of financial performance, and the best performing companies have got 7% better financial performance since 2010. So we're starting to see, and we know we have to be careful with this kind of analysis, evidence that those companies taking action are going to deliver better financial returns. As we've seen on the government front, governments are increasing their activities. We see new initiatives from the United States, from China and others. The UK is bringing in mandatory carbon reporting, and this is driving change in companies. Companies are very alert to the regulatory risk from climate change. So there's really a great start. Lots is happening, but in summary, it's absolutely imperative that the big emitters improve their actions to reduce emissions and really prove they can do so, because we're not seeing that. Of course, governments really need to develop more incentives to help them to do that. So that's really the summary of the report at this stage, and it gives me great pleasure to hand to Malcolm Preston from PwC, the authors of this great report. Malcolm.
Great. Thank you, Paul. I don't want to talk so much about the detail of the report. I'd like to talk a bit about what you were just talking about, the decoupling of economic growth from emissions and actually broader environmental impacts. Let's be clear that growth is good. Growth creates jobs, it creates economic activity, and of course, and that takes people out, helps take people out of poverty. It also, of course, gives investors return on their capital, which is what we need for financial markets. But that growth must not be at the expense of the environment or at society in general. So what's going on here? Because this idea of decoupling clearly needs to happen and isn't happening. Why not? We asked CEOs this question earlier in the year. What's stopping them from decoupling growth from emissions, from environmental impacts, and also from how they could actually help society more? They gave us three key reasons why this is happening, or why they're not taking more action. The first is they still feel a pressure for short-term return. And much of what we're talking about requires longer-term investment, and they feel a pressure to focus on short-term return rather than longer-term strategic gain. The second is there's no legal requirement to do any of this, and then in general there's no legal requirement to report more. There are starting to get moves for integrated reporting in certain countries, but generally no real requirement to do so. But the third, and the one which is the most prevalent response, is there are no standard tools or methodologies to do this. So whilst there are companies innovating in certain areas, there's no standard way, because today, basically, the way companies measure growth, they measure success, is through financial returns. There are some financial, non-financial metrics, but broadly it's around financial returns. And what they're really looking for is something which is a more holistic view as to how do I manage these trade-offs between trying to deliver growth, but at the same time reduce emissions, reduce environmental impacts, and improve societal outcomes. If and when those tools start to exist, either because they're mandated or because they become the norm, then I think we'll start to see that decoupling really accelerate.
Can I just come back to you on that point? And to what extent are those externalities, as an economist would call them, not already included in the cost of goods, the cost of services that a company has to incur through its regular business activities? Surely that the implications of burning fuel are covered by the cost of that fuel for the business. So to what extent are you proposing something that is different from the conventional financial framework that businesses operate in?
Yes, because what we've seen is, I mean, you can absolutely talk about it, and I know these two gentlemen talk very well about this, the market failure, that the genuine cost of greenhouse gas emissions is not costed in the price of energy. So the externalities are not being priced on the cost to society. They're working on market-based forces which are not currently pricing the value to society. So what we're suggesting is a tool that actually puts a societal value, a cost to society, or a benefit to society on all these externalities, such that you can take a holistic view as to what's going on, and then manage the trade-offs between water production, energy production, or even increasing jobs in certain locations.
Can I also just come back to, you can answer it, Paul or Malcolm, either, really. I was interested in the figures, Paul, that you mentioned on targets and the number of companies that have targets and those that don't. I think it was 24% in one sector, in the energy sector, that don't have targets. For the companies that do have targets, what is the pattern in the type of targets that they self-impose? Are they absolute, that they will reduce, irrespective of the size of their business, they will reduce emissions? Or are they more framing their targets in the sense that per kilowatt hour of energy we produce, we will try and reduce emissions? Because that really is at the nub of this decoupling argument. Mm-hmm. Can you comment on that?
Well, great question, and what we see in the companies are reporting is a mix. So about half and half. Half have absolute targets, half have intensity targets, and that increasingly we are seeing a trend to more absolute targets, because obviously companies realise that's what the science requires. But for some sectors, like the energy sector, they say this is very difficult because an absolute target is likely to constrain their growth, i.e. their current business models doesn't have a strategy to decouple emissions from economic growth.
And presumably the point there is that unilateral action by one company will render it uncompetitive with its peers if it imposes extra costs on itself without their competitors following suit.
Assuming that it costs more to decouple. I'd agree with that, but that's not necessarily the case, as we saw in some of the examples earlier on, in the advert there at the beginning. Some companies are able to decouple and get a financial return from doing so. What I would say, just to add to this, is the point that was made by Paul about 18% of companies that have incentivisation within the company are outperforming the rest of the market. That's a really important bit. There's one thing to have targets. There's another thing to how you operationalise those targets into the organisation. And unless you align incentives within the organisation to the targets, there's a real risk you won't actually meet the targets anyway.
Right. OK. Thank you, gentlemen. I now want to broaden the debate to our distinguished commentators from around the world. If my memory serves me, we have Switzerland, Germany, India, China, Taipei, and Japan, all on the line. So welcome, everybody. Just so you know who is going to be speaking, just let me get the final list. We have Juan Aranos, who is Senior Vice President and Head of Group Control at Nestlé. We have Christiana Figueres, Executive Secretary of the UNFCCC. Leon Cami, Executive Director of Hermes Equity Ownership Services, who will be joining us on the couch very shortly. Li Gao, Deputy Director General, Department of Climate Change for the National Development and Reform Commission in China. Ajoy Misra, Deputy CEO of Tata Global Beverages. Hisao Mitsui, Managing Executive Officer and Senior Vice President of KO Corporation in Japan. Andy Palmer, Executive Vice President of Nissan. And JT Wang, Chairman and CEO of Acer. So welcome, everybody. I want to start this global debate at the international level, and then we'll get deeper into the weeds of how businesses are responding. And really turn to Christiana Figueres to start with. Christiana, to what extent can governments assist businesses or compel businesses to do what they need to do, take these responsibilities more seriously?
Yeah, thanks very much, Guy. I would like to actually make three major points here in the context of your question. The first is the urgency of the challenge that we have in front of us. The second is the different paths that need to be followed by developed countries on the one side and by emerging and developing countries on the other side. And the third is, how do we actually get there? What are the different roles that governments and companies can play to collaborate with each other on this? So to my first point, which is the urgency. Let's be very clear. We would anyway, even if we didn't have the climate challenge, we would be evolving naturally toward a lower carbon intensity of energy sources, because that is the natural evolution that humanity has been on. So we would do this anyway. What climate change does, it basically is an inbuilt timer into this natural evolution of energy, saying we need to do this by a certain point in time. We need to peak in our carbon emissions, to use your word. We need to decouple growth from carbon emissions by this decade. That is a major challenge, but it is one that we can actually face. My second point is that there are different paths. Developed countries need to make what I would call a mega retrofit. Developed countries already have all of the energy that they are going to need. What they need to do is they need to retrofit the quality of the energy that they are generating and increase the efficiency with which they are consuming. But so what they need to do is they need to have focused policy frameworks that will actually, as we have seen in the video, create jobs, maintain them in the competitive area for years to come. Very, very different from the challenge of emerging countries and developing countries. What they need to do is what I would call a mega bypass. And what I call their bypass is help these countries to leapfrog what are already obsolete technologies. My favorite comparison here is Kenya. Kenya, it has 15% of electric penetration, so only 15% of the population is electrified, but 75% of Kenyans have a cell phone because they have figured out how to charge it without necessarily hooking it in, plugging it into the wall. So the fact is, Kenya, like many other developing countries, has completely bypassed what is now the obsolete telephony technology of having to have a wire into your home to be able to communicate. That is the kind of inspirational example that we have to use to understand what is the transformation in energy that developing countries have ahead of them. They have the opportunity to leapfrog many of the technologies that are carbon intensive, that are now already obsolete, and move into the new technologies of the future. It is these countries that are on the verge of the greatest investment they have ever made in infrastructure and energy. And if they are not supported, both financially and technologically, to be able to make that bypass, to make that leapfrog, they will lock themselves in to a situation that is going to be very, very difficult for them to get out of, and they will have locked the planet into the kind of scenarios that we don't even want to consider. My third point is, what is the difference in the roles that government and business can play? Well, it's very obvious that government role here is to set the policy framework, and that they can do in two different ways. At the international level, they can, as we're already seeing over the past 12 months, there can be various bilateral or trilateral agreements among governments, such as the one that we're seeing between the United States and China, to begin to work together on policy frameworks within their own countries that have to do with climate change. But countries are also at the same time working at the multilateral level within the Climate Change Convention to slowly but surely advance in the multilateral policy development that is going to send the signal to the markets that we are indeed moving toward a low-carbon society. Now, at the national level, governments can certainly use many different instruments to basically do what we all need to do at all levels, which is simply put a price on carbon. Whether you do that through the creation of markets, and we have seen markets mushrooming everywhere, in particular in Asia over the past 12 months, that indirectly puts a price on carbon. You can, of course, have much more direct pricing of carbon, but all policies, all instruments, financial instruments that take a look at how do you internalize that externality begins to put a price on carbon and begins to move in the right direction. Governments can also help with the R&D investment that needs to go into the new energy technologies. On governments, I must say, to summarize, that I am the first one to admit that governments are giving a policy signal, both at the international level as well at the national level. We have already 30 countries with climate legislation. However, the policy signal is insufficient. And that is why we're seeing the insufficient reaction from companies. So we do have a policy signal that says we're moving toward low carbon, but we do not have a strong policy determination. To my final point, which is the role of business, and in particular big business, because I think that is where the opportunity is. The CDP report tells us that 10% of the large companies are responsible for 73% of the greenhouse gas emissions of the world. Well, you could see that as the challenge or the problem. You can also see that as the opportunity, because in fact, it is the multinationals that account for 1/4 of global GDP. It is 1% of multinationals that actually are in control of 50% of the global investment in research and development. So these companies do hold a very, very important key to the solution. Now, these companies as a whole are contributing to the increase in greenhouse gases. So what do we need to do? Well, Paul has already spoken about the importance of bringing the carbon exposure that all of these companies have, either exposure to the oncoming policy or, frankly, exposure to the very physical risks that these companies have with extreme weather events, either one and both. Bring that carbon exposure into the boardrooms and make it a business continuation issue. That is what this is. Will these companies be able to continue business as usual under the current situation that we have with climate? Frankly, these companies buy insurance policies for many other risks. They mitigate their risks. They should be doing much more to mitigate their risk of climate, their exposure to carbon, and to contribute to the solution, both with respect to their own production cycle as well as up and down their value chain. And Malcolm has just made the point that in order to do that, we need to cut into new ground. Yes, indeed, we need to cut into new ground. We have never faced this situation before. We've never faced the challenge of climate. But that doesn't mean we cannot do it. We do need very courageous, very forward-looking companies that are going to move into, and we will hear today under you, Guy, from very encouraging companies that are taking steps. Now, what is important there is that they're taking these steps not just for love of the planet, but they're taking it because it makes ultimate business sense. But finally, let me say, not even the companies from whom we'll hear today are doing enough, and it should not be just a small percentage of companies. We need every single, in particular, large company to be following suit and following that very good example. Because, Guy, the policy of waiting for Godot is not going to take us forward. Companies cannot wait for policy perfection, and governments cannot wait for companies to be miraculously moving into low carbon production and fostering low carbon consumption. They have to do it together.
Christiana, thank you very much. That's a stirring call to arms for governments and for business. And it really sets the challenge out very well. I would really now like to invite Mr. Li Gao from the NDRC in China to comment on potentially some of the things that Christiana was referring to in terms of leapfrogging the technologies that we've locked ourselves into the developed world, and find out how China is trying to break this connection between economic growth and emissions. Mr. Li Gao, are you there?
Yes.
Hello.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Hello. Good afternoon. Yes. Christiana just made great points. I think it's always difficult to address the same topic after her. So I like to change a little bit the angle. I would like to talking about this issue on a national level and share with you as a developing country how Chinese government played its role to promote emission reduction. In fact, the Chinese government recognized, I think it's very early, that climate change is not just a global challenge, and it's also a serious threat to China's sustainable development. And actions is key to our future. We cannot just wait. So that's why when awareness of the public on climate change in China was still quite low, the Chinese government had already started to mainstream the low carbon transformation step by step. Starting from the 11th five-year plan, the Chinese government set a nationwide target to reduce the energy intensity. And then in 2007, we launched China's national program on climate change, which was the first of such in developing countries. And this program set the priority sectors for carbon emission control with concrete milestones for actions, and also established a very clear link between these actions with our energy intensity target. And for the 12th five-year plan, additional to the energy intensity target, the government has set the carbon intensity reduction target. And both of these targets are domestic, legally binding. And at the same time, China's mitigation action, say up to 2020, reducing the carbon emission per unit of GDP by 40 to 45% on the level of 2005, is well-known nation and worldwide. By doing this, the government sent out a very clear and strong policy signal to the business, to the whole society. Addressing climate change is China's firm determination. And it's a long process and will continually enhanced. So the enterprises have to seriously consider how to run their business under this kind of circumstances. In fact, in China, our national energy intensity target has been allocated to more than 16,000 enterprises. And our pilot emission trading scheme in Shenzhen has already been operated in this June. And we are now working on establishing a carbon emission reporting system for these companies in order to better comply with our carbon emission reduction targets. And we believe that the disclosure of emission data is crucial for emission control. And I think today in China, more and more people tend to believe that we can achieve a win-win between a healthy economic growth and emission control. So next step, at least we are going to do two big things to enhance our efforts on emission control. One is to promote climate change legislation. The other is enhancing the use of market mechanism. Hopefully, during the 13th five-year plan period, we will be able to see the come out of law on climate change. And the current emission trading pilots will be scaled up to a nationwide carbon market. And I would like to thank the invitation from CDP to join this event, and I appreciate CDP's effort to promote carbon disclosure tools to the business in China. And I also like to see CDP's contribution to our efforts to build our carbon emission reporting system tailored to the Chinese enterprises. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Li Gao. It's always extremely interesting to hear what China is planning to do, and you make the 2 points that it's the responsibility of business and also the involvement of the regulatory environment, be it direct regulation or through market-based mechanisms. And Christiana also mentioned the responsibilities of businesses, and importantly the financing of that transformation, the leapfrogging that needs to happen in many countries in the world, and the responsibility that those companies have to their investors. They are possibly carrying liabilities that they don't know. So I would just like to get the thoughts of Leon Mackey from Hermes on, from the investor's perspective, how do you see these risks that these companies are carrying?
So first of all, thank you and good morning to everyone. We in Hermes Equity Energy Services, we represent about 30 investors worldwide, and they typically are what you'd call a universal investor. So they've got long-term sustainable return targets. So it's not about the short term. And so we do see carbon emissions as a cost right now. And we recognize that it's not currently being captured in any way like that. And so for us, we're encouraging governments to implement some form of pricing. Now, ideally, this sort of pricing would be done in a global way across all countries, because otherwise you start getting into competitive issues across countries. And I mean, with the new government coming in Australia, we might see a carbon price actually, a carbon tax actually coming out, which is probably the wrong way. But I've heard companies say directly to me that if we have too much of a cost to take minerals out of Australia, then we will move elsewhere. So ideally, this would be global, and it's not impossible. I just read a couple of days ago in the Financial Times, Mark Carney, who is the governor of the Bank of England here in the UK, just recently come in, but he was writing in his role as chairman of the Financial Standards Board, and talking about how they're working with the G20 to globally think about how can we make sure that our financial system is stable going forward. And it is a global initiative, but carbon emissions is also a global initiative. Now, we've got to be pragmatic, and so if things don't start to happen globally, then there may be things which countries can do on their own. There could be some form of carbon tax which comes in, but if that is a competitive issue, there may be some form of subsidy or very focused subsidies which governments could start to think about for companies who are thinking more long-term in terms of carbon emissions, thinking more long-term in terms of bringing in low-carbon investments.
The carrot rather than the stick approach.
Otherwise, it's putting ourselves in the shoes of companies. They're there as a business enterprise. They have duties to shareholders to get the best return they can. If they're going to make themselves uncompetitive relative to other companies, then it's very difficult to see them introducing the right sorts of technologies and making the right sorts of investments.
Well, that's a great segue into the next part of this debate, which is really to understand how global companies are facing up to this challenge, often in the absence of regulation. When you are forced to do something, you have no alternative. But in many countries, as Christiana was saying, the regulatory environment is very patchy. And I would just like to invite Ajoy Misra from Tata Global Beverages to try and illuminate some of the experiences that they've had reducing their environmental impact in the absence of regulation.
Thanks, Guy, on that. Hello, everybody. So Tata Global Beverages is part of the Tata Group, and Tata Group, as many of you may or may not know, is India's one of the largest group of companies, over $100 billion in turnover, and about 80 or 90 large, medium, and small companies. So Tata Global Beverages is the FMCG beverages company of the Tata Group. We are largely into tea, 75% into tea, about 20% coffee, and we are about to build a water portfolio. So that's Tata Global Beverages. And in the absence of regulation, very interestingly, the way you say it, how the Tata Group has defined its commitment to sustainability and the environment is actually in the DNA of the Tata Group. So there is a policy that the Tata Group has called the Tata Group Climate Change Policy, enumerated by the group chairman himself. So when the group chairman of a large group himself says the following, which is that the Tata companies will play a leadership role in climate change by being knowledgeable, responsive, and trustworthy, and by adopting environment-friendly technologies, business practices, and innovation, while pursuing their own growth aspirations and the enhancement of shareholder value. To us, in Tata companies, in the different Tata companies, and I'm in one of them, when the group chairman of the company very clearly says that each company, while pursuing its stakeholder interest, has to be having an embedded DNA of sustainability and has to watch its carbon footprint, water footprint, and what have you, it does become easy to take a stance and make policies that are a little longer term rather than short term. For instance, we in the Tata Global Beverages, in the last 2 years, we have actually managed to reduce our carbon footprint intensity by 22% in a 2-year period, whereas our business continues to grow, top line and bottom line. And really speaking, we do not see much tension within in terms of pursuing our, and we do have a target of carbon footprint being reduced. We were able to actually do that by having an agenda that says we will adopt a climate change strategy that is a 4-pronged strategy. One, we will follow sustainable agricultural practices towards climate change adaptation. So whether it be teas that are grown in Kenya, Malawi, and parts of Africa, or it is teas that are grown in the northern and southern parts of India, or coffee plantations that we have in the southern part of India, we will work with entities such as the Ethical Tea Partnership, as entities such as the Rainforest Alliance, or in India, we've started a new movement recently for developing a sustainable code. So sustainable sourcing is a major pillar that we believe we want to promote. 2 is sustainable forestry, afforestation and sequestration towards climate change mitigation. Of course, use of renewable sources. We have examples in our businesses where our Tata Coffee entity was able to reduce its energy footprint by 25% by plugging into a wind energy enterprise close by. We have an example in Sri Lanka where we have set up one of the largest biogas plants in Sri Lanka in terms of utilizing animal waste to produce gas on the estates. We also have other examples of solar being followed. So I could go on, but I'm going to pause here and say basically, therefore, that in Tata Global Beverages, while we continue to have an issue about getting 100% commitment at all levels in terms of embedding the DNA of sustainability across the organization, There are pressures of investments and costs, but it helps to have an overall group philosophy that that does promote and give senior management and CEOs and in the boardroom some support in terms of following a more medium or a long-term strategy towards sustainability.
Ajoy, thank you very much. It does seem like the holistic approach that you've outlined has paid dividends. 22% reduction in emissions whilst growing the top line. Is that correct?
22% in the last 2 years that we have followed the reporting of the carbon footprint.
Well, that's a tremendous result. Congratulations. I would like to now turn to Hisawa Mitsui from Kao Corporation in a different country, in Japan, and in a very different sector, the chemical sector, which faces very different challenges. Can you give us some insight into how you're tackling these issues?
Thank you for inviting me on this forum. Kao Corporation is in mainly consumer product business, which is such as laundry detergent or shampoo and conditioner and cosmetics. And therefore, we have a mission to create a product which respond to need of the times and specific geographic by using our innovative technology and to realize wholehearted satisfaction and enrichment of the lives of people globally. We call this activity as yoki monozukuri. In Japanese, yoki means good or excellence. Monozukuri means development or manufacturing products. Kao think it is important to work on our environmental activities throughout the entire life cycle of products, from material procurement and manufacturing, distribution, sales, use, and final disposal. Most of Kao products are for everyday use in homes. Carbon emission on use stage in homes account more than 50% by our life cycle analysis result. Therefore, it is essential to work together with consumers and customers, business partners, and society to reduce carbon emission and water consumption during entire life cycle of products. Various opportunities by the climate change has actualized already. Kao has launched some products to meet it. I want to explain Kao's challenge by using our laundry detergent as example. In Japan, Kao has launched a laundry detergent to make lower electric usage during laundry. In other words, to make washing time shorter with superior performance. Also, it consists of plant-based materials and has good biodegradability. And to reduce carbon emission on distribution stage, it has 2.5 times smaller than conventional type with same washing frequency. For China market, because of their severe water situation, we have developed the laundry detergent which can rinse by smaller amount of water consumption. Kao think our environmental activities need to be considered based on entire life cycle of products. We have unique activities called Eco Together. There are 3 activities in Eco Together. First is Eco Together with consumer or customer. We need to get customers' understanding and cooperation. Second is eco together with business partners. The third is eco together with society. Finally, we think it is important to disclose our environmental data information and join a carbon, water, forest, and a supply chain program of CDP. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Your central theme of life cycle assessment and making sure that your products have far less impact when they're used is something I think we will return to when we look at the automotive sector and the computing sector, which have similar issues. I'd like to now turn to Juan Aronoz from Nestlé, also in the FMCG, but in the more on the food side, who can give us hopefully some insights into how they are tackling these issues.
Thank you, it's for me really a great honor being here, and especially representing Nestlé, which again for the second year has been recognized in your global index with the highest score. So we thank you for that, because that's really the proof that our long-term commitment to really making progress in this area is working. I would like just to share with you some additional dimensions. Firstly, sharing. I said that this requires long-term commitment, and it takes time. We are quite proud of having achieved over the last 10 years to reduce 25% our absolute emissions of greenhouse and also our water withdrawal, while at the same time doubling the size of our business. That's an effort that continues. We have additional targets going forward to continue reducing, but clearly it's a challenge, but also an opportunity. And I will touch a little bit on those two dimensions. Firstly, I would say that this comes out of conviction. At Nestlé, I think it's part of our values, really trying to have environmentally healthy operations. But it also reflects a very fundamental reality, that water is getting more scarce, that biodiversity is declining, that resources are getting increasingly constrained. And when you think also on the challenge of a growing population worldwide, it represents a real challenge to continue feeding and nourishing in a healthy way all these people. And that's very core to the mission of Nestlé. And clearly we understand that a company like ours that looks at the long term, that really is not worried about what's going to happen this year or next year, but what's going to happen 20, 50 years down the road, sustainability is very core to all the things we do. You have mentioned life cycle. I would like to share with you a little bit what we do. And we look at this in a very holistic way. It touches the entire value chain. It starts when you develop the product at the very early stage, understanding what are going to be the environmental implications and how the product design can be optimized so that that impact is minimized. It's also about responsible sourcing. And you know that Nestlé sometimes has been in the spot at some moment in time. We really believe that this is not about choosing between bad or good suppliers. It can also be that, but it's especially about helping suppliers to be sustainable in the long run. And we have a very long tradition of agronomists that are there in the fields helping in palm oil production, in coffee production, in cocoa, really to have this kind of sustainability, because it's the right thing, but also because it's our interest to really ensure that we have sustainable supply sources. Continuing, it's about manufacturing also. For us, there is a continuous effort, and that takes investment. Clearly, it doesn't happen from one day to the next. You need to invest consistently to ensure that you have efficient technologies that optimize the use of energy and water. And then it continues down to the logistics side, because clearly we ship many products around the world. Whenever we have the option, we prefer to go by sea or by railroad rather than by road. And also when we finally ship the products to our final customers, it's also about optimizing all that final logistics. So I'm a finance person, and clearly all these things are right on the long term, but are also, there is a business case around many of these initiatives. We have many examples already of how our factories are co-generating energy using biomass. And sometimes even in some cases, we are generating a surplus of electricity that is sold to the public networks. And we have many examples like that. Also, when you look at your process in a way that really puts minimizing the environmental impact, you are also unlock many opportunities to reduce internal waste in the process. And by reducing internal waste, ultimately, you make your whole value chain more competitive in the marketplace. So these are dimensions that I think are interesting to know. Also, I think it's important that, and it has been mentioned by the colleague talking before me, the consumer dimension. We are firmly committed to educating the consumer. The consumers more and more demand from corporations like ours that we help them in making choices. They are really judging the brands and the products they buy also on the perceptions on how those products are good or bad for the environment. And we are working on that. We have one initiative which may be interesting to share, that it's still on a limited stage of development, which we call Beyond the Label, no? And basically allows you through QR codes in the packaging to kind of select that with your QR, with your application, and go and understand the full impact of that product that you are buying. That's the case where all the Kit Kat lovers in the UK can already do that. In Philippines, all the moms that buy our Nido milk powders can also look at that, and that's progressively going forward. Because this is going to be, and we see it every day, corporate reputation. Being a good corporate citizen in this topic is going to be really more and more important to continue developing business going forward. I would like just to end this section mentioning also, when it was mentioned about the incentives topics, that we have some on promoting incentives, especially when we talk greenhouse emissions, and we see sometimes biofuels as part to this problem. We have a great concern because we see how more and more agricultural land that should be dedicated to produce food is being used to produce biofuels, and that may create some concerns in the long term, and even we have some doubts that depending on the crops that are chosen, that really helps ultimately the greenhouse emissions. So with this, I have given you a short kind of panorama of where we stand, and clearly Nestlé is very committed to continue being and working to be part of the solution rather than part of the problem. So thank you.
Juan, thank you very much indeed. If I walked away from these three interventions with the impression that the rest of the world behaved and ran their businesses like these three companies, I would feel extremely reassured that the future for my children would be in safe hands. I would like to ask each one of you, if I could, do you think, two questions, do you think that the initiatives that you are doing in your companies are replicable in other businesses, in other sectors? And secondly, do you think that this is enough? With the example of Tata of 22% reduction over 2 years of absolute emissions and growing business, if that can be replicated, then we have a potential way of solving this problem. But is it replicable, and is it enough to take carbon out of the, to reduce emissions in absolute terms? Let me go back to Ajoy first, because he came up with the 22% figure. Ajoy, is what you're doing replicable, and is it enough?
Firstly, I must confess in all humility that I would term this company to be at the beginning of a journey. There is much, much more that we can do within our own business because we have pockets of excellence in different parts of the world, and the Eagles Cliff factory in the UK is already zero waste to landfill, but we have 20 other factories around the world that aren't. We have a biogas opportunity in one part of the world in Sri Lanka, but there are many more areas we can do. Solar, we can do much more. On wind, we can do much more. We are just embarking on the water footprinting, and we are in very early stages. So the sense I have is we have so much more to do in our company itself, But is it replicable? Of course it's replicable. I think this is very replicable, and this does make business sense. It does resonate with consumers. It does make every employee in the organization feel good, feel motivated. Everybody wants to leave this planet and a footprint for the children, which is green and good. So to me, certainly replicable, much more to be done. And I think it's a holistically good thing to do for all our stakeholders.
Thank you. That's an optimistic note. Hisao Mitsui, your views on those two questions?
The reason why the CAO is approaching based on the life cycle, entire life cycle of product is our products are used in home use in every day. So major part is the usage stage. So that's why we want to create some environment familiar type product and launch those products. But in considering entire life cycle of products is, I think, replicable matter or manner for other companies, I think. And the second one is, second question is,
we can replicate the good work that you are doing. Is it enough globally to reduce emissions across the world?
I think the activity we are doing is not enough, or at this point of time. We are doing inside of Japan mainly, but some of the countries we need to think about more to meet their needs for each country. So is that enough? I don't think it's enough. We do need more investigation.
Right, more work to do there. Juan, from Nestlé's point of view, is the stuff that you're doing replicable, and is it enough?
I think that some of that indeed is replicable, but probably it requires that the companies that maybe have a longer term history around these topics probably have the forums to actively share what are the practices that we are doing. We are fully supportive of all the multi-stakeholder platforms like the UNFCCC, where we can meet and discuss and share, because clearly I think there are companies that today, need to get started. If we can help, we are willing to do it, and we are active participants in many forums. But at the same time, we should be realistic, no? It takes effort, it takes investment, it doesn't happen overnight. So it really, the companies need to incorporate this as an important mission, and probably need to allocate and put resources behind that. And that probably there are companies that are more willing at this stage to do it than others, no? And probably we need to get to a higher level of understanding across the board.
Right, and another common theme that is coming out from these three examples is the relevance of long-term strategic commitment, and that if companies are going to take carbon out of their supply chains, develop new products, improve the manufacturing processes, then that's not going to happen overnight. It's a long-term strategic journey. The audience here, the panel here in the studio has great experience of working with companies. Malcolm, to what extent of your experience do you see the importance of long-term thinking versus short-term?
Well, obviously long-term thinking is what everyone's after for long-term strategic value, because if you just focus on the short-term, you may well not be around for the long-term. But what I find interesting about what we've heard from these examples is the talking of full life cycle analysis. Because what I suspect companies are finding as they do that is they will start to understand that there will be challenges around trade-off. You might make a product which has a lower emission in the home, but it might cost more to make, which means there's a trade-off with the economics, or you might have higher emissions or a different resource requirement in order to generate that. The challenge is, how do you manage all those trade-offs to get the long-term across the whole life cycle? How do you manage that in a way that gets the ultimate best result across the whole life cycle? Because saving water in one country may not be particularly relevant if that country has water abundance, but it might take lots of emissions to do it. So having a tool, and I come back to this idea of, I'm sure these companies we're talking about have created some tools which allow them to manage some of those trade-offs. Many clients we come across don't really know how to do that. They're struggling with what is the best way of optimising across our entire value chain.
Paul, I mean, the CDP has been running this initiative for over 10 years now, so you've seen the companies grow up and mature in their understanding of these issues over time. To what extent can you correlate that long-term thinking with outcomes and performance in terms of the CDP index? It's quite difficult for companies to everyone wants to do things tomorrow, but it does take time.
No, and that's right, Guy. And two big changes that we've seen is, firstly, a few years ago, most companies didn't even have a climate change strategy. When we certainly started in 2002, companies were challenged by this question, what's your strategy on climate change? We've seen companies develop that, but not just develop a standalone climate change strategy. The core leading companies are integrating that into their core business strategy. So we know that the dominating factor of business has been, how do we make profit? But many companies now say, how do we make profit whilst reducing emissions and sustainably? I think the other key area is that more than 10,000 emissions reduction projects have been reported to CDP last year. Of course, many of those have a payback in 1 year, like behavioural change, 3 years, energy efficiency, changing the processes, systems and buildings of the company. But a lot of the leading companies in the leadership indexes that we publish are investing in projects that pay back longer than 3 years, like renewable energy, new buildings, new factories, and major investments, because they know they will generate long-term value for the business and the shareholders.
Right. Let me come back. I'll come back to you later, Leon. Let me come back to the.
This is from Taipei. I have some comments.
Yes. Hello.
Okay. As the leading ICT company in Taiwan, Acer has worked together with the CDP on CDP PR events and supply chain management since 2008. We successfully activate major player in Taiwan ICT industry, which is considered as a major supply powerhouse of worldwide PC market, about 300 million pieces a year. And Acer has built up the capacity of supply chain about carbon management and climate risk management. Continually, Acer asks suppliers to work together with Acer to set the short-term and long-term greenhouse gas reduction target and improve their energy efficiency in manufacturing. After 5 years' efforts, I'm happy to report Acer is able to use its influential power to multiple contributions through supply chain management, and we definitely will continue our efforts in these aspects. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I was just going to bring you into the discussion, but you got in ahead of me. Can I also ask you a little bit about the life cycle approach in Acer? I have a growing family of young boys, and they keep buying more and more electronic goods. Our house is full of electronic goods. They are getting more and more efficient. They consume less and less power.
Yes.
To what extent do you think where is the trade-off going between the number of devices that we want to use and the efficiency of those devices? Which one will win?
It depends on what is the fashion, what is the major trend. And I'm happy to report and share with you some encouraging development in ICT industry worldwide about the opportunity to significantly reduce the greenhouse gas emission. Today, people buy more and more smart handheld, like the tablet and the smartphone, and buy less PC. And tablet PC consume about 1/4 of the power electricity compared to notebook. If the smartphone maybe only consume 10% of the power of a notebook. And the new mainstream ICT technology is favorable for the adoption of a low carbon lifestyle. The usage model is going to be low power smart handheld linked with renewable cloud server through very efficient broadband wireless communication. And many small software, we call it the APP, working in this system to satisfy users' real-time critical needs. But it's small and quick, so it consumes very, very small power. So the new trend of the technology is small software, small data, low power CPU, memory, and display, which is totally different with the traditional PC technology. So here is the opportunity. If we can do two things, the world may change significantly. One is to define and promote a so-called low carbon lifestyle about how to use the new ICT device in an economic way. For example, we promote don't chat on the smartphone all the time, and use that only when it is needed to help you to solve the critical problem. The other thing we have to do is to encourage the investment to the hardware, software, and communication, which can reduce the power consumption of the mentioned usage model. This item should be implemented in Greater China area because it already became the cluster of the overall supply chain. The new report, Smarter 2020 by Jesse and the Boston Consulting Group in December 12, indicate ICT industry can help other sectors such as power, transportation, agriculture to reduce greenhouse gas emission more than 7 times of ICT's one. Besides, the greenhouse gas emission of ICT sector will become smaller due to the new technology trend. It is the right timing to define the low carbon lifestyle in relating to ICT device usage behavior and promote it to make it become pervasive. And very likely, you will find the investment of these efforts bring in very fruitful returns. And the trend already on the way. So we don't have to start the trend because the trend is on the way. So we just take advantage of this new trend we have the opportunity to significantly reduce the carbon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A very inspiring and I think educational set of comments on the role of technology. And as Paul Dickinson mentioned at the start, we are using that technology right now to reduce our carbon footprint rather than flying everybody from Asia into one place. And we can talk as if we were in the same room. The technology angle, I think, is critical to solving this problem, and in nowhere is it more important than in the automotive sector, which, from memory, consumes something like about a third of all energy. Andy, Nissan is at the vanguard of this. To what extent is the technology changing the energy profile of your business?
You know, if we look back over history, the car companies have really been the poster boy of poor emissions, and the bad boy, if you like, as you said, emitting something like 30% of the world's carbon. To some extent, the car has been demonized, and I think it's important that car companies now become part of the solution, not part of the problem. We can't wait for governments. We have to get on and improve by ourselves. Why? Let me give you some basic statistics. The number of cars per year sold around the world is something like 80 million. 80 million cars are sold every year around the planet. Huge number. But the thing is, it's growing every year, and that's thanks to the emerging economies. By 2050, we anticipate about 200 million cars a year will be sold. Now, you couple that with the fact that for example, in the United States, about 800 people out of every 1,000 own a car. If you were to look at somewhere like China, that's 89 people per 1,000. And India is something like 20 people per 1,000. And it's not going to stay like that. I mean, basically, as those economies emerge, people are going to want cars. They're going to want transportation, and that's what's growing this huge growth in the automotive space. Moreover, again, by 2050, about 70% of the population is going to be living in cities, and we already see the issues surrounding lack of clean air in many cities around the world. So the industry has got to change. It has got to become part of the solution, and we have to bring technology as part of that solution. Thank you for recognizing Nissan on the vanguard of this. Obviously, in 2007, we declared that we'd bring the first mass-marketed electric vehicle to market, and we launched the Nissan Leaf in 2010. This sits upon our basic corporate philosophy as Nissan Motor Company of enriching people's lives, and essentially two pillars. One is zero emission, and the other is zero fatality, and they do cross over to some extent from a technological point of view. In our opinion, zero emission technology is led by the electric vehicle and perhaps later by the fuel cell vehicle. Couple that with connected cars, allowing basically data to be uploaded and downloaded to make journeys more efficient, and likewise the advent of the autonomous driving car, which Nissan will launch in 2020. This will dramatically reduce the emissions, or the emissions emitted from motor cars. Nissan is deploying these technologies as part of its mid-term plan. We have 6 pillars upon which the company growth is built. Zero emissions is one of those, and we've stated as an aim very clearly that we're going to lower new vehicle emissions by 90% from the starting point in the year 2000 to the ending point in 2050, a 90% reduction in CO2. Obviously, that means thinking long terms. That means bringing to market technologies like the electric vehicle, and it means being brave in the face of criticism from around the world. I know that when we announced in 2007 that we were bringing the electric car to market, you know, we had various comments, including from some of our competitors that this is lunacy. It's a matter of when you take technological leadership, having a thick skin, and the great news is that it's paid heavy dividends for us. Nissan's brand equity has improved significantly over time. We've been able to carve out a very clear brand position for our company, and you know what? It's also profitable. We make every year among the best profits of the industry, and more importantly, I suppose, is beyond our expectation, the electric vehicle is profitable within the third year of its life, which is great. So we're passionate about choosing a different path. We're passionate about bringing these technologies, electric vehicle technology, connected car technology, autonomous driving technology. We're passionate about bringing them to market, even though some people will criticize us and some people will say it's not reasonable or it's not doable. You know, the fact is Nissan has sold 75,000 Nissan Leafs to date, and basically own that market. And I've just arrived in from Frankfurt Motor Show here, and was delighted to see a few other vehicle manufacturers suddenly declaring that EV is the future. Well, you know, great, they're 7 years too late. We already own that space, so we're gonna basically keep that leadership and continue to hopefully lead the way in our industry. One last point, I think important to tie up with cities and governments. I was delighted to stand with the mayor of Barcelona 2 days ago, and they've announced that their taxi fleet is moving over to electric. I sincerely hope that other cities and countries will follow suit. We see great leadership, for example, from China with the electric car. So in closing, we know there are many challenges ahead. What's clear is we have an unwavering commitment to zero emissions, and we want to be known as the automaker that changed the industry. Thank you.
Andy, thank you very much. One quick question, and then I want to bring in Li Gao from NDRC. How many of those 75,000 cars were sold in China?
None. We start sales in China very, very soon. Basically, under the Venusia brand, from next year we start with the sales of the zero emission. It's based upon the Leaf. We thoroughly and realistically expect China to be the biggest market for electric vehicles in the midterm.
Thank you. Li Gao, do you have some views on the way in which policy can be assist that development?
I think. Thank you. I think I would like to address the role of technology, alternative energy and investment, their role in China to achieve absolute emission reduction. By saying this, I think situations may quite different in developing countries and developed countries in terms of to achieve a decouple the emission from economic growth. For developing countries, before the emissions can reach the peak, they have to make efforts to control the growth of the emission. So it takes time. So in developing countries, time is also a key element. I think it's as the same important as the technology or investment and alternative energy. Talking about the investment during the 12th five-year plan period, we're going to spend 45 trillion yuan into the low carbon related areas. And it means the great opportunities, and the level of investment will be further scaled up in the future. And this investment will greatly promote the development and commercialization of low carbon technologies, including energy efficiency, renewables, and others. In fact, we are now working on develop a low carbon technology list. We hope that this work can serve as a guidance to our government and our enterprises for their investment in the low carbon area. I think this kind of work can have a very constructive impact for our efforts to control our emission. And in terms of energy, optimizing the energy structure is one of the key strategies for China to control our emission. We have set an ambitious target for the non-fossil fuel development. As China's energy mix is largely based on coal, our work for the energy construction optimization will take quite a long time. And it will need a huge investment and significant technology progress. Again, since the coal dominates our energy structure, lots of research suggests that clean coal technology, particularly CCS, may have to play a very important role, a quite important role for China to achieve absolute carbon emission reduction in the future. And some speakers are talking about the China's market, and in the future, I think more and more companies will operate in China, and at the same time, we also need to make great efforts to improve our people's life standards. So how to achieve a balance with between the economic growth and emission control is a big challenge. I think that on one hand, we must try our best to meet people's demand on better life. On the other hand, we need to try our best to invest on the new technologies, especially on the new alternative energy, and improve our efficiency. And I think it's a great task for us, and I think it's also a great business opportunities today. Thank you.
Thank you. You make a very good point about combining the need to be efficient in the way that we use energy, but also in the way that electricity is produced. You can decarbonize through both ways. And I do know that China is now the leading investor in renewable energy in the world. So you are putting your money where your mouth is. You also mentioned time, and you did say that it takes time for a country like China to develop. That can also be seen as an optimistic, from an optimistic point of view, because that infrastructure is being developed for the first time. You can go back to what Christiana said and make sure that those investments now in buildings, in equipment, are done at the cutting edge of technology, and you don't have to retrofit, the mega retrofit situation that we face in Europe and North America and Japan and elsewhere. So yes, time is important, but also you have the benefit of being able to accelerate that time. Leon, we've had sort of contrasting opinions, and particularly I want to pick up on this role of technology. And from an investor's perspective, I can see that putting investments in Acer who can move quickly, technology is moving to their advantage. It's providing better products, cheaper products, and lower energy consuming products. The same with automotive. You can see the benefits that technology is happening on electric vehicles and all of the infrastructure around that. Does that mean, from an investor's point of view, that's where you now focus? What about the old guys who still need to produce the steel, produce the plastic or the energy? How do you encourage them to do more? Are they off your list, or do you work with them?
No, absolutely work with them. And I think a good example of how you can say an old industry, which is working with quite a lot of new technology, is the oil and gas industry. And an example in Canada is that I think about 12 oil sand producers in Canada, both domestic and also international, have come together to work out, to join forces, to share what they know about oil sand extraction technology, and they're sharing that technology so that they can each use, as an industry, the low carbon technology. So there you have an example of an industry working together, collaborating together to reduce carbon emissions in an old industry. And I think the old vanguard, I think those industries do have an opportunity to reduce carbon emissions. I think one thing which Malcolm was saying before is this idea, we're talking about it in terms of decoupling. I think what we've heard from a number of the industry speakers today is there is a real opportunity to break the trade-off. It's not necessary that continuing growth means increasing carbon emissions. We've heard lots of examples from lots of different industries, not only from ASA, and I think that would also be relevant for the old vanguard industries which you cite as well.
The other sort of pattern that I've seen emerging from a number of these comments from the guests is the cross-fertilization of technology. So ICT being deployed in automotive applications now, and your example of new technologies being deployed in oil sands in Canada. Maybe the solution is technology, and it is greater cross-fertilization of those breakthrough, those enabling technologies, communications or whatever, like we are doing on the TP system here. Paul, is that a pattern you've seen coming through in terms of the survey over the years?
It is. I mean, and certainly you're right. That we need technology. We need revolution in technology. We've heard a little bit today how some countries and companies are investing in R&D. And we see increasingly companies saying, look, we're investing in more of our R&D budgets in low-carbon R&D to deal with the challenge. But if we bring up the new technologies of the future, of course, we'll benefit our financial returns. So I think technology is playing a key role, but it's clearly not the only role. We can't rely on technology alone, and the companies would acknowledge that. So we do see, and we have from Leon, that increasingly companies within sectors and across sectors are collaborating. Ultimately, no one's got all the answers to solving climate change and creating a sustainable planet at this point in time, but there are many brilliant efforts, and we've heard from some great ones today, moving forward. And the key is, how do we bring those together to really create a very fast, clean, green, low-carbon revolution?
Malcolm, is this something you're educating your clients on?
Yes, it is. I mean, obviously technology is one of the answers, but we come back to what a number of the people have talked about today, which is it still has to be economically rational. Just deploying new technology, if it's more expensive, it won't go anywhere. So we need technology at scale, because generally when you get to scale, you start to see costs coming down, which means it becomes economically rational. We like this idea of leapfrogging, because with the leapfrogging being led from the developing world, which is a huge market, that gives us the opportunity to scale new technologies in developing markets, which can then be brought back, bizarrely, to the developed world.
Okay. I'd like now just to go back to our global guests and ask for a very quick comment from every one of them. What is the single action, single message, call to arms, if you like, takeaway that we should look for going forward? Cristiano has unfortunately had to leave us, but if I go through in the order in which I introduced you, Li Gao, from China's point of view, very quickly, just 30 seconds, what is the one the one message that you would like to leave us with?
Well, in my view, to achieve carbon emission reduction, the government has to lead the way by showing the firm determination, forming a strong policy environment, catalyzing and incentivizing with public investment, and finally, help the enterprises to build a stable expectation that low carbon is a good business. Thank you.
Thank you. Government leadership is always important. Ajoy Misra, your view on the message?
My view would be that companies that have embarked on this journey must resolve to accelerate and to collaborate and co-create and be unwavering in the quest for minimizing the carbon footprint, the water footprint, and despite the economic macro situation, the resolve to be very sustainable and to be a leading proponent of that philosophy, that resolve must not waver. And it's infectious, so we must spread the infection. Indeed,
courage and conviction seems to be coming through in a number of commentators. Hisao Mitsui, do you have a single one comment to leave us with?
From a consumer product standpoint, we will generate more environmental familiar type product to keep people's lifestyle, a better lifestyle, and we will do our yoki monozukuri, continue to do our yoki monozukuri.
Thank you. That life cycle approach again coming through. Juan, your views from Nestlé?
Yes, very quickly, maybe going back to the importance of educating consumers, I would like to leave the audience with a massive contradiction that we have with the reality of food waste. Around 1/3 of the food we buy or use ends up in the garbage can. And I just have here a report issued today by FAO, which quantifies the impact of food waste on 3.3 gigatons of greenhouse gases. That equals about 6 months of emissions in the US. So here, this is a very concrete opportunity that we can, by educating people on doing this differently, make change probably quite quickly.
Thank you. JT Wang, do you have a single comment to leave us with?
Yes, the personal computer dominated the ICT industry for 30 years. And in recent few years, just have a paradigm shift. Is a huge change. And smart handheld, cloud computing, broadband wireless, it's just happened in these few years. And it will continue for more than 10 to 20 years. And it can be a very efficient tool for every sector to improve the efficiency, reducing the carbon. So think about that.
Thank you very much. Andy, you have 30 seconds.
30 seconds, right. Well, the electrification of the motor car is as inevitable as death and tax. It's coming. The only question is one of speed, and two comments. One is we can't do it alone. We need the help of governments to help with the deployment of infrastructure over their countries, and I look particularly to China with enthusiasm to see that, to China leading that. And secondly, my message to the other car manufacturers. Come on, guys, you need to catch up. We need to work together to preserve this planet for our children and our children's children.
Thank you, Andy. Stirring finale. We're running out of time now. I really just wanted to wrap up with some of the key messages that I think have come through. The first is having a holistic life cycle approach to this challenge. Secondly is courage and conviction. There are a number of companies taking long-term bets. Third is technology, and fourth is collaboration. public, private, and amongst the private sector itself. So it leaves me to thank everyone from around the world for joining us this morning and this afternoon, and studio guests as well. I wish you a good day, and let's lower carbon. Thank you very much.